So for Nike, it was an authentic move, whereas Pepsi's was inauthentic. So if you're considering tapping issues, current events, you have to be careful and make sure that you are not touching energy that does not belong to you.
My name's Peter Sumpton, and this is the Marketing Study Lab podcast. A podcast for those that are thinking, have thought and are doing, or already have a marketing qualification. But there's a little bit of something for everyone, as we cover a whole host of marketing topics. I chat to some amazing guests, each one a superstar in their own niche. And if you have a burning marketing question already, or after this episode, get in touch. We'll chat it through. peter@marketingstudylab.co.uk, or find me on LinkedIn. The link is in the show notes. If you'd like to leave a review on iTunes, this will really help others find this podcast and spread the marketing word. Now let's get on with today's episode. Setting objectives and KPIs is something we're going to get on to later. Why they're important, and what is the difference. We also cover this topic with our next guest, Ruthie Bowles. Ruthie is a B2B Content Consultant, owner of Defy the Status Quo, or Status if you're the other side of the pond, and Ruthie so eloquently points that out to me as well. Nice one. Ruthie provides content marketing strategy and creation for B2B companies that want better than your bog standard, above average, mediocre content. And it's fantastic that we've got somebody to talk about B2B content. As Ruthie describes in our chat, it's all about the authenticity and moving these online connections to ones that are valuable and above all else, human. Who'd have thought that? In this digital age, human to human conversations are still massively important. So there was only one obvious place to start this conversation, and I know you're all thinking it. Ruthie, what is a cryptologic linguistic course instructor?
Oh, yes. So that phrase, that job title is from my time in the Army.
Oh, wow.
I was in the Army, the United States Army, for about 8.5 years. And when I got out, I was a cryptologic linguist course instructor. So we'll start with the first part, which is the cryptologic linguist. And basically that means a translator who's also an intelligence analyst. So I was in intelligence in terms of like my job specialty. And so my language was Persian Farsi. And eventually,
sorry to interrupt. What's that?
Persian Farsi is the language they speak in Iran.
Okay. Right. Got you.
And then there's a dialect called Dari that they speak in Afghanistan.
Right.
And then there's another dialect called Tajik, which they speak in Tajikistan.
Wow. Okay.
And so when I got out, I was at that point in my career where it's time for me to start training others in the work that I did. So my last duty station, I was an instructor for people just coming into the Navy and Air Force and Army who were going to be Persian Farsi cryptologic linguists. So.
And can just out of interest, can you speak those languages?
Yes, I
wow.
can.
That's unreal. Okay. We're not here to discuss what languages you can speak, not necessarily, but I just want to get a little bit more serious and a little more focused and ask you first and foremost, what's the story that's brought you to this stage of your career as the owner of Defy the Status Quo?
Oh, I like the way you guys say status. It sounds so much better.
See, the thing is, I don't know if you've ever heard of them, but there's a band over here. I'd call them old rockers, and they're called Status Quo. And if we call them Status Quo, it doesn't quite work as a rock band. So that isn't why we say that. But yeah, okay. It sounds so much better when you say it though as a business name. So let's go with defy the status quo.
Okay. So like I said, I was in the Army for about 8.5 years. I was pregnant with my second child when I got out, but we also have one that's adopted. So we had 3 children at the time because I'm married. We were in Texas, moved to Maryland, which is, Texas is like in the middle South, and then all the way to the East Coast to Maryland. And I was a stay-at-home mom for a while with all 3 kids. We decided to stay in Maryland and buy a house, and it's really expensive in Maryland, the cost of living. So I went back to work as a federal contractor, doing the same job, translating Persian Farsi. I just wasn't in the military anymore. And I was doing that for a while, and I was good at it, and the pay was really good. And, I was doing it. We bought our house, and that's great. But then I was like, I kind of want something else. So I started freelance writing on the side. The house we bought here, we're on 2 acres, and, I wanted chickens, I want goats, I want garden, big, the whole thing, And I was like, okay, well, if I freelance on the side, then I can earn a little extra money and that'll help us pay for that. But what started happening was that I started to like live for those few hours that I was working part-time each week way more than my 40-hour, full-time job.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, a few months after I started working part-time or freelancing part-time, I found out I was pregnant with what would be our 4th child. And I was just like, I've worked way too hard. I've worked way too hard. I've done way too many things in my life up to this point to dread what I do Monday through Friday, 40 hours a week. I was like, this cannot be like how my life is going to be.
Yeah.
And so once that thought popped up, it was like once I had the realization, I dreaded going to work even more. It was like I dreaded dreading it. Right.
Yeah.
So it started compounding. It got worse.
Psychology. Yeah.
Yes. And so I started thinking of what it would be like if I could work from home, if I ran my own business, if I had my own clients. And that was what I did, as many hours a week as I wanted to, and all the time. And so it was about 6 months or so after I started part-time freelancing that I was like, okay, I'm going to use my maternity leave from this baby, and I'm going to try and push my freelance writing full-time. And that is what happened. And around that time, I took about 2 weeks off. I even had, my part-time clients that I still had, they didn't even realize that, first of all, that I was pregnant, and they didn't realize that I had had a baby until they heard me refer to my 4 children one day instead of my 3 children. And that was how it all came out.
Wow.
Yeah. And so then it started to evolve, and I was like, okay, so what if we're going beyond freelance writing? I started realizing that my clients had these different needs. And my past experience as, an intelligence analyst, as a translator, like I was very well equipped to, acquire some of the additional skills to fulfill those needs. And one of the primary needs was content marketing. So not just the content creation, but the actual like development of the content marketing strategy behind that creation. So the reasons why we would be writing the content we were writing. And so I just started devouring all of the information I could find, like HubSpot courses, all sorts of content, marketing, ebooks and actual books, and everything I could get my hands on. And what I started to notice was this acceptance of mediocre content. So when you talk to freelance writers in like large groups, let's say Facebook groups or something like that, they're like, oh, geez, why do clients like not realize that you have to pay for quality and blah, blah, blah. And I think the big thing is that people have accepted a certain level of mediocrity. And that is actually the inspiration for my company's name, Defy the Status Quo, because that is the status quo is that level of mediocrity, people plugging in keywords without like real thought for how they're going to actually perform and what they mean to their audience. And so that's kind of how Defy the Status Quo was born, and how I made that transition from freelance writer, which is an incredibly important position. Writer is an incredibly important position in any marketing department. So it wasn't that I didn't find the content creation side of my work, fulfilling and valuable. It's just that I saw these other needs. And because of my analytical background, I was able to kind of take, how I developed professionally as an analyst and pair that with my creativity. And thus the content marketer in me was born. So that's kind of where Defy the Status Quo came from.
Absolutely. I love the fact you took your circumstance and you almost doubled up. You made something of that. So okay, this is my passion, this is my circumstance, this is where it fits. Let's do this. Because a lot of people would have just gone maternity leave, looking after more than enough children. Looking after one isn't enough. I haven't got time to do this. But if you're passionate about it, you make that circumstance work, and you made it work perfectly for you, which is fantastic. I want to just delve a little bit more deeper into your company, and if you can, it's more about what it's called, really, but can you explain how you go about defying the status quo?
Absolutely. So I did touch on it a little bit, but it starts from that level of mediocrity. Um, Nothing that comes from me or my team, nothing that comes from us is going to be mediocre. It's not going to be good enough, right? So we're 100% quality over quantity. Um, More than happy to sacrifice what's considered perfect search engine optimization for real, authentic connection with the target audience. But it also goes into the way that we run things, the way that things are done, our client relationships. We always any interaction that anybody has with a client, it's always about being a partner. So that's the other side for me, is that I want to be a partner with my clients. I'm not the type of person to sit by passively and say, "Oh yes, whatever you tell me to do, I'll do it," even if I know that that's the wrong thing to do. So when, people come my way, it's typically because they want somebody who is going to tell them that that's a terrible idea. And I think that's one of the biggest advantages to having an outside consultant in almost any capacity, is that if the baby is ugly, they will tell you that the baby is ugly, basically. Um, and so that it's all of it there, so we look to be a partner, and that's one of the most important parts. But everything from the ideation of content, I'm always looking for unique perspectives, unique angles, unique tie-ins, ways that we can do something. Yeah, like everybody's writing about pretty much almost any topic you can think of. Some people, there's more people writing about certain topics than others, but almost nothing is new. So defying that status quo, how can we make it new? How can we make it interesting? How can we make it uniquely belong to the client? And that is largely what it is that I'm looking to do.
So it's interesting. I just want to pick up on one point there, because you were saying that you want to make it better than mediocre, which is fantastic, and everybody should be. Good is no longer good enough. It needs to be better than that. But how do you create authenticity within content? You were saying there that there's not a lot of original content. So how do you make it unique?
I would say that one of the biggest things is it starts with creating that brand voice, right? That brand, it's almost like you're building or creating a person, right? So your company is your company, and that's your brand. But if your brand was a person, like if my company wasn't called Defy the Status Quo and it had a regular name, like Ruthie, my name.
That's not regular.
Are
Come
people well, Ruth, right? Ruth is very biblical, but that is my given name. Would people still be interested in Ruth as the brand, right? The brand being the person. Would they still be interested? And that is the question that I think you have to start from. So are you building a brand that's interesting, right?
on.
And so that includes, okay, so when we put content on the website, social media channels, email, there's consistency there. So when they open up anything from your company, it's consistent. That's the first piece. You want to be consistent. Second of all, you want to be interesting. And I think part of this comes from pushing the limits. You don't necessarily want to break hard and fast rules. Like there are certain industries that have rules about what they're allowed to do and what they're allowed to say. Like I'm thinking like financial type industries is what immediately comes to mind. But a lot of people hold back. They think, oh, that doesn't sound very professional, so I don't want to say it that way. But oftentimes, professional equates to boring. Right? So no. So again, it's like, so if your brand is the person and your brand is very professional, then make sure that professional is not a synonym for boring, because you can be very interesting and still be professional. You can have a tone. Your audience can grow accustomed to hearing certain things expressed, by you in a particular way. And so that part of it also, I think, relates in terms of authenticity. But then there's also what they're used to hearing from you. One thing that kind of immediately comes to mind, like when brands are inauthentic, they try to tap into energy that they've never tapped into before. So that always raises a question mark. So think of that Pepsi commercial with Kendall Jenner. Did you see it?
Yeah.
So Pepsi was tapping into an energy that was not theirs to tap into, basically. And that was what caused the problem. They were inauthentically boiling down an incredibly complex issue, and it offended people on both sides of the argument. So it doesn't even have to be that it was one side or the other. They offended people on both sides by implying that it was so easily solved. But Pepsi, but on the same turn though, Nike, coming out in terms of the kneeling during the anthem argument, yes, people were upset. People were upset about that. But on the other side, there were a lot of people, and that was, Nike's primary target demographic, but a lot of people applauded Nike for the stand that they took. But that was already energy that they had already been involved in and, been working with before. So it did not come off as inauthentic. It might have made people mad, but it wasn't inauthentic. And of course, it doesn't always have to be that dramatic, but you have to be careful. So when Pepsi did it, everybody was like, what are you even talking about right now, Pepsi? Like nobody asked you, be quiet and sit down. And that's why everybody was mad. But with Nike, it was different because they had already been involved. I mean, when you think of Nike, it wasn't really a surprise that they came out on the side that they did.
Yes, it's not too far away from their brand and what it stands for.
Exactly. And so for Nike, it was an authentic move, whereas Pepsi's was inauthentic. So if you're considering tapping issues, current events, you have to be careful and make sure that you are not touching energy that does not belong to you, that has nothing to do with you. If it's like when companies take, it's LGBTQ month or whatever, right? Any holidays, women equality or, autism awareness. When people take those holidays and use them to create social media posts, it can come off as very inauthentic if no one has heard you mention it before.
Yeah, that's one thing that I've noticed over the past couple of months. You just, it's almost like a sixth sense as well. You just see it and you just think, if this wasn't topical, would you be doing it?
Exactly. Like if you weren't just trying to get some likes or get some shares. Yeah. And so that happens a lot with the LGBTQ community, I think is probably one of the easiest ones, especially since Facebook lets you change like filters and things on your profile picture and all of that stuff. And so when companies tap those things, it comes off as very inauthentic for the vast majority of them. But if you're doing fundraisers and you're talking about, we did a run for X, cause, or, hey, there's actually a page dedicated on our website to this particular cause or this issue, and you talk about those things on social media, then that's energy that you've already been mixed with. And so it's very authentic, and it would resonate with your audience. So I think so it's consistency. It's, being honest and avoiding anything, for short-term gains when you have long-term losses, like tapping into causes and holidays that just aren't yours.
Absolutely. While we're on content, there's a clear difference, or I feel there's a clear difference with the content we consume online compared to traditional methods. Why and how are these actually different?
I would say that at least in my mind, the biggest difference between online content and traditional style content would be the way that the audience interacts with them. So, with traditional style content, let's say something like a billboard, a poster, a magazine, you are choosing exactly how your audience can interact with that content, right? So, if it's a
Mm-hmm.
magazine, all the pages are always the same. The customer, the audience is always going to see certain images the exact same way, whether it's good for them or not. And when it's over, and that's it. But with online content, your audience is choosing how and when they will interact with your content. And I think that that is something that people have to consider, especially when you consider like blog content and you look at content marketing specifically, it's not interruptive. People come to you. You share social media with your website links or whatever, but what that means, though, is that people can choose to click on that link or not. If you're driving on the road and you pass a billboard, you typically read it whether you want to or not. And so what's on that billboard, may or may not make me unhappy, depending on what it is. But I don't typically have a choice in seeing it because it's there.
Mm-hmm.
But if somebody is sharing something online, I can choose not to see it. It's very much like ads. We can download software that keeps us from seeing those ads, in our browsers and everything. But I feel like that's the biggest thing there is that your audience online chooses when and how they interact with your content. So that's what makes it all the more important that your content not look like everyone else's because you're blending in instead of standing out. If the audience gets to choose, you have to do what you can to be the one that they choose versus, traditional style content, you're standing in line at the grocery store, that's just where I have to be. And so the advertisements or the content, the imagery that's there in the line that I'm bombarded with, I don't really have a choice about that. So I think the biggest thing is the audience choice and how and when and even where they interact with your content.
Yeah, absolutely, and we've seen it, this power shift to consumers, and they choose what they consume, when they consume, and how they consume it. And that's why it's so important to get not just your comms right, but the channels right as well, because you need to know where your audience is. Because if you don't, then you're just not going to have that impact. But I want to move the conversation on to more B2B content marketing, if you don't mind, because one of the main reasons that I wanted you on the podcast is because you've got an ebook, which I'll put a link in the show notes to. And you mention in this ebook, which is called The Business Owner's Guide to B2B Content Marketing, that there are 2 questions you need to answer before writing. Who you are writing for and why. Can you just talk us through these?
Absolutely.
Cool.
So in the B2B space, and so when I mentioned, people say, oh, the content has to be professional, and that typically equates to boring. This is like a plague in the B2B industry as a whole. We are plagued with professional, boring content. And I think this largely comes from companies not being clear, marketing departments, or even individuals not being clear on who it is that they are writing for. Oftentimes, what I see when I'm looking at any B2B website, they are writing for themselves or they're writing for people like them, but they're not actually trying to sell to people like them. So like content will go on their website and their competitors would understand it. Their competitors would probably appreciate it, but that's not who they're trying to sell to. They're not effectively communicating with their audience. So you see this sometimes in technical companies, like so any sort of technology company, their content, dives deep into DevOps and using all of these phrases that, the layperson wouldn't necessarily understand. And their argument often is, okay, well, we're trying to show our expertise. It's like, but you've gone too far. You've gone too far because the IT person at the company that you'd like to have as a client gets it. But the decision maker, the person who's got the credit card or the buying authority, does not get it. So you've gone too far for the decision maker. They don't know what you're talking about. And so they don't trust you because now you just sound, you sound like a know-it-all.
Yeah.
Basically. And you sound like you're talking over them. You're making them feel like they don't know what they're talking about. And that's not how anyone wants to feel. And of course, that is not anyone's goal. When you put out content, your goal is never to make someone feel as if they aren't good enough or don't know enough. You don't want to incite negative feelings, but that is just one of the things that I see. And you can tell that they don't necessarily know who they are writing for. And it's not to say they could never write to that technical audience, but a lot of the outward facing content, so any articles on your blog or your website, things like that, that should speak more to the audience that would actually make that decision. Now, if you really did want to address a more technical audience, something like a white paper would probably be more suitable. But again, it's knowing your audience. And a company can have more than one audience. Perhaps you do have the higher level decision maker as your audience, but you also have the person working every day in the IT department as a second audience. So you would create content for both audiences, but it's knowing that makes the difference. So it's knowing that keeps you from accidentally creating the right content and then accidentally creating the wrong content. In today's technologically advanced world, people expect a personalized experience. So if you're creating articles or white papers or ebooks and you're emailing them, let's say, to your audience, your decision maker audience is not going to be nearly as appreciative of an incredibly technical white paper as the IT user audience. So it's just knowing that. So, okay, so maybe we don't send that white paper to the decision maker audience because they're not going to want to read it. Right. And so then you become less relevant because you sent something irrelevant. So knowing who you're writing for, and then the why. And that's just kind of, okay, why are you writing at all? And the answer better not be because our chief marketing officer said so. That's always the wrong answer. It's like, okay, why are you on Instagram? Because Bob said that we have to be on Instagram, so we're posting photos. Don't do that. Yes, exactly. And if that's the start to you finding out why, oh, your competitors are doing really well on Instagram. How's that happening? Okay, that's the start to finding out why, but you need to find out why. You can't just, oh, they're doing really well on Instagram, we should be on Instagram. No, find out why they're doing so well on Instagram, or else you're just going to be posting and getting a lot of crickets, more likely. Instead of getting the same sort of response. There must be something that they're doing, especially for B2B. There must be something that they're doing on a platform like Instagram that they would be generating a great response. So you should always find out why you're doing anything. And it's why you're posting to this particular channel. It's why are you posting today? Mm-hmm. What is the point here? What is the goal? What are we trying to achieve? So there's always the why. So it's the who you're talking to and the why. And that keeps you from wasting resources. It keeps you from, and resources being time, manpower, money. It keeps you from wasting all of those things when you're very clear, when everyone is very clear on the why of your content.
It always comes back to those three things. I try and drill it into to anybody that I'm tutoring. The fact that if you're ever stuck for an answer, it always comes back to time, money, and resource. Simple as that. That's you get out card, but it's a good marker, those three things. So say we've written this content, it's out there, we think it's doing well, but we're not sure. How can we measure the success of our content?
So if it's already done, then you'd have to establish what you would like to happen. I would say, though, that before you write anything, or create anything, whether it's like something like an infographic or a video or even a podcast, you should be very clear on what your goal is for that piece of content. If you start out with a goal, then you will be able to determine whether or not you were successful, um, because you created it with that goal in mind. And so this is getting away from the, doing content for the sake of doing content. When you do it that way, it's incredibly hard to measure success. But if so I like to do my content plans in quarters because it allows us to be pretty agile while still looking, ahead into the future. We have a rough plan for the year, but I actually plan quarters in detail. And so when I look at the quarter and I'm like, okay, what's my goal for this quarter? We want to increase signups on the website for the email list by, let's keep it modest, like 10 or 15%, let's say. So all content that we're creating is going to be working towards this goal. And I'm keeping it simple. You could have more than one goal. You could run more than one campaign, but I'm just keeping it simple. So let's say all the content for the quarter is going towards that goal. Okay. You can check weekly, monthly, and then at the end of the quarter to see how you're progressing towards that goal. The question is, did, signups on the website for the email list, did they go up? So that's your main goal in terms of determining success. Now, that's not to say other metrics, other valuable metrics don't also go up, but that wasn't your main goal. So those would be like nice surprises, and you should definitely figure out why those metrics went up. What was it about the campaign that caused effects in other metrics that you weren't planning for? That's great because that's something you can use moving into subsequent quarters. But if you are working on a specific goal, you can assess at any given time how you're doing in terms of progressing towards that goal. And then taking it a step further, okay, what do these email list signups mean for us? And then that's, again, delving into your metrics in terms of your email list. Okay, we know that for every 1,000 people on our list, we get 100 people who will buy something, or they will become an incredibly qualified lead, let's say. Okay, so what's the value of that? Okay, out of those 100, 25 stay on to become, let's say, their subscriptions. They stay on for at least a year subscription. So you're able to quantify, going forward, you're able to kind of quantify what that means for your business. Okay, this is what an email sign up means. Out of, this many number of people, this number of people are going to be buyers. Now, again, that's pretty rudimentary and keeping it basic. Every business is different. So that's a bit easier for a business that offers something like a subscription service or a product of some kind that would require ongoing supply. For service businesses or like consulting firms, it's a bit different and the targeting is different. So I primarily work with consulting and service firms, but so the targeting is different, but there are ways to track that return on investment and to take those lessons learned. That's the other part in determining success. Whether you're successful or not, you've learned something. So even if you're not successful, at least you know something about what not to do. So that's why it's important to have those goals, create the content to meet those goals, and then see how well you did. Because it tells you not just about the content, but it also tells you about the performance of your marketing department.
I mean, you saying there it just simple and basic goals that you were talking about there, but for some that it isn't just simple and basic. It's not actually having that goal and just talking through what we've just done there is massively important, because if you don't have those goals, like you were saying, then how do you know if it was right? How do you know what's working or not? And I just love the fact having that one overriding goal, and then there's other things that we look at and that we can measure and monitor and track. But are we hitting that goal? I love that. Fantastic stuff.
And just in terms of me saying that it is like a simple or basic, what I mean not so much is that it's, anybody should understand it, but it's more like once you get into a marketing department, if you're working for a company or you get it, you start working as a consultant or marketing consultant, you'll find that most marketing departments, whether you're in-house or you're the consultant, have more than one goal. So in terms of, what we were talking about, that's why I was keeping it to one, but they may have multiple campaigns that run at any given time. So you would be tracking multiple goals in terms of success and content. And you may also, from that overarching goal, you may derive sub goals that relate to that. So you may derive a goal for every channel. So for social media, for search engine traffic, you may have different goals associated with those that would in turn, contribute to your overarching goal. But I didn't want to get it that complicated. Also because I couldn't hold all those numbers and things in my head if I
Yeah,
did. So
yeah. I thought you were going to start doing mathematics then, and yeah, we were going to get a whiteboard out and graphs and charts and all sorts going on. But yeah, let's leave it there. Speaking of being within a marketing department, do you need to be in marketing to write good content? And if you don't, are there other departments or areas of the company, internally or externally, that we should be looking at for inspiration or help?
absolutely.
Cool.
It's funny. I was talking to somebody about this, I think yesterday. Um, but we have to get away from operating in silos. And so what happens is you get into this kind of affirmation bias when you stay within just your department. And this happens with content as well. So again, it's about knowing who your audience is. And in certain ways, the marketing department knows the audience, and the audience is the target customer, client, anybody you want to read your content for whatever goal that it is that you have. It's about, yes, you know them very well based on their interactions with you in social media or email, demographics, customer data, or client data. You know them very well. But what about your customer service? They deal with your audience's problems. When there is a problem, that's who they call. What sort of contributions could customer service have for marketing? And then you look at sales. What sort of contributions could your sales department make to the content that you're pushing out? Your sales department are the people or person, whatever size the company is, they're the people who are dealing with prospects, and they are the people who have, their hand on the pulse, if you will, in terms of what makes a prospect decide not to buy. So not just what helps them decide to buy, but what helps them decide not to buy from your company. And so they typically have those reasons there. What if you could address those things in your content? What if it's, oh, let's do an ebook on comparisons of XYZ, and our sales team can actually use that and push it out to the qualified prospects who haven't yet made a decision. So there's ways to get around that. And then even also looking at areas like research and development or operations, looking at those departments, there's almost always a place where you can get help for content. And that ties back into that authenticity. As a company in any industry now, we kind of almost always have to position ourselves, hey, we are the experts. But you can't just say that you're an expert. That doesn't work. You have to prove that you're an expert. And depending on the size of your company, you may need to prove that everybody is an expert in your company, or at least there are experts in every department. And so that's where you can get contributions. It's a great opportunity to kind of raise up individual employees or individual departments, but it's having that conversation and being open. As a consultant, I love to have, okay, so I'm working with my point of contact in the marketing department. I would also like to have a contact in customer service, a contact in sales, a contact in operational departments. Not that I'm going to be constantly talking to them, but if we have content ideas that come up, I want to make sure that I have somebody that I can ask, hey, so we were going to do this, is there anything that you'd like the audience to know about what it is that you do in terms of how you contribute to our product or our service? And so that kind of brings everybody together and makes the content not just what the audience wants to see, but it makes it a more authentic reflection of the company as well.
I love that the fact that it's not just the external. It's almost you're bringing people in to what you're doing, which helps with communication, which helps with commitment, which helps with culture, which helps with a whole host of things. And we didn't even mention content then. There's so many benefits to seeing outside your department that you're bang right. So many people do see these silos. I can't do that. That's marketing. I can't do that. That's finance. And it's like, whoa, no.
Yes.
Why have we created these things for ourselves? These categories where you're at a company for a reason, and that's hopefully to grow and develop as a person, alongside helping the business succeed. And you can't do that alone. So I love all that. It's fantastic. But I'm afraid, Ruthie, are you ready for some quick fire questions instead of all this in depth? You're on your own with this one, I'm afraid. Okay, here we go. Name one must-read business book.
Simon Sinek's Start With Why.
What was the last thing you Googled?
How to naturally help with baby teething.
I think we know why.
Yeah.
What is your most used app at the moment?
LinkedIn.
Excellent. Great answer. What would be a one tip for people who are studying at the moment?
If you are struggling with any concept in anything that you're studying, try and find a real world case study to help, kind of work through the technical textbook type stuff and actually bringing it into real life. You'll remember that example better than what you read in the book.
That is brilliant. I couldn't have said that better myself. Pay attention to that because that is superb advice. If you could tell your 10-year-old self one thing, what would it be?
Ooh, one thing, to send back through time. Being yourself will help other people be themselves.
Ooh, wow. I like that. Excellent. Okay, one final question. If people want to find out more about Defy the Status or Status Quo, depending on which side of the pond you're living on, I'll get in touch with you. Where should they go?
So defythestatusquo.com is the website. You can find all of our content and everything there, information about services, contacting. You can also email me at Ruthie at defythestatusquo.com. And like I mentioned, I'm on LinkedIn, Ruthie Bowles, and I'm also on Instagram. Defy the Status Quo Biz is the handle. Twitter is Anna Ruthis, ANNARUTHUS. I've had that Twitter handle for a really long time, in case you couldn't tell. And yeah, I mean, as a content marketer, I try to be available, kind of out there everywhere. But LinkedIn is probably one of the best platforms to reach me on. And I could do a whole nother interview about LinkedIn, but
Well, maybe we'll get you back when I'm aiming to pass 100 and then maybe get a few guests back. So if you've got things to say about LinkedIn, let's get that sorted soon. Ruthie,
absolutely.
It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you today. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. This was a fantastic interview. Thank you so much.
Ruthie, once again, thank you so much for joining us on Marketing Study Lab this week. And now we all know what a cryptologic linguistic course instructor is. Our lives are complete. But they would be after I talk about the main takeaways from this interview. The first one is that good simply is not good enough anymore. In the digital world, there is a lot of mediocre content. To stand out, you need to be better than this. Ruthie takes this to the extreme with everything that she does, from client communications to ideas and the end results, obviously. It's a message we should all be listening to. Authenticity comes from consistency, being interesting and honest, and most importantly, not holding back and being true to your brand energy. What is your brand energy? Get in tune with it. Don't choose short-term gain for long-term losses. It's not a good strategy. And finally, don't operate in a silo. And this goes for content creation as well. Utilize what is around you and within other departments. This will not only improve your content, but also internal communications and relationships. And finally this week, a top tip as we look at setting objectives and KPIs. So it's time for a quick spot the difference between objectives and KPIs, key performance indicators. I'm going to try and keep this as simple as I possibly can. And because I love an analogy, I'm going to use a car journey here. And this is how I would implement objectives and KPIs within a business. So your objectives should be what you are focused on achieving, your main goal, an end result, why you are doing what you are doing. In terms of a car journey, this would be your end destination, the postcode you've punched into your sat-nav. KPIs are similar to objectives, or certainly how I use them, they're very similar to objectives. But these are smaller markers you can set to make sure you achieve the overall objectives, as we discussed previously, i.e. getting to the end destination. In the car case and the journey, this would be fuel efficiency, or reaching the halfway point by a certain time. Elements that are not specifically your overall goal, or what you aim to do, but will keep you on track to achieve this objective. So in summary, objectives should be your bigger picture stuff, where you are looking to achieve your greatness, whereas KPIs are smaller, incremental markers that, if hitting them, will build to achieve your main objective. Thank you so much for joining us today on Marketing Study Lab. It really means the world that you're listening to this out there. And hopefully I've provided you some value. If you're looking to know more about what Marketing Study Lab does and is about, go to marketingstudylab.co.uk or get in touch with me personally, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, or feel free to email me at peter@marketingstudylab.co.uk. Happy marketing.